This podcast does not provide medical advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 43 years to help answer questions that you might be having about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, here to ask the questions that you might have while listening to our broadcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult end-of-life decisions for yourself or a loved one.
So please relax, get yourself a little something to eat and drink, and thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me. In the first half, we have our recipe of the week from Charlie. In the second half, we're going to be talking about what the deceased should wear at their funeral, sort of a little bit of queer eye for the dead guy. And in our third half, Charlie discusses customary burial clothing in different religions. So, Charles, what are you making me to eat today?
Puppy chow!
Oh.
Okay, that's it. Finished. Puppy chow. Oh, wait a minute. No, this is not dog food. Unless Purina wants to throw a couple of bucks our way. But this puppy chow also...
In that case, we would eat it.
Says you. But listen, this puppy chow that we're talking about as our recipe is also known as monkey munch and muddy buddies, muddy munch, reindeer chow. You know, Rudolph just never gets a break. Well, there was that one foggy Christmas Eve. But listen, any way you call it, we are talking about a great hands-on recipe that transforms dry, flavorless, old person cereal. Old person. Hang on, folks. We need to scratch that out. Ageism is not tolerated at Everyone Dies. Okay, finished. So, for this concoction... So, for turning this concoction into crack for teens, well, that's better than ageism. Its origins, not ageism, but the chow, likely trace back to recipe pamphlets and community cookbooks from the 1960s.
Those were the days.
Those were the days. So, for the uninitiated, puppy chow is, like many Midwestern snack foods, a bunch of easy ingredients tossed into a bowl. Oh, that's right, baby. Tossed into a bowl and all shook up. Mercy. Thank you, Alice. I thought you had left the building. Anyway, shaken to create an...
What did you take before we started this?
Nothing.
Okay.
So... shaken to create an unhealthy whole. That's much better than the sum of its parts. So named because it closely resembles dog food. Talk about the circle of life.
Really?
Yeah. So puppy chow starts with Chex or Crispix cereal, rice or corn, gluten-free, before gluten-free was a thing, coated in a mixture of peanut butter, chocolate, and butter, and dusted with powdered sugar. Such a snack. Sounds like
two kinds of butter.
I'm sorry, 2 kinds of butter?
Yeah, peanut butter and butter.
I never thought of peanut butter as butter. But it is in the name, so there you are.
Yeah, there you are.
But if you spend any part of your childhood in the Midwest, well, maybe not if you're newborn, but you've probably already seen the light. Puppy chow is real, and it's impossible to keep your hands out of the bowl. But how, you ask, is this marvelous creation made? Virtually every recipe goes roughly as follows. Put 9 cups of cereal, again, Chex or Crispix are ideal, in a bowl and set it aside. Then microwave 1 cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips, half a cup of peanut butter, and 1/4 cup of butter or margarine for 30-second increments. until the mixture can be stirred to a smooth consistency. Stir in 1 teaspoon of vanilla and a pinch of salt, and then pour it over your bowl of cereal, mixing it until it's evenly coated. Then dump it into a 2-gallon Ziploc bag and in 1.5 cups of powdered sugar and shake. Yep, it's that simple. Add popcorn or more chocolate, pretzels, or whatever nuts you like. I'm not going there. Make it, but make it yours.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yes, it does. So please go to
Crunchy, salty, sweet. It's just got everything.
Just like you.
Like you, Charlie.
It's like your
Just like you.
It's like your personality. Yeah.
It's just like you, Charlie.
Sweet and salty.
Yeah, with nuts.
Yeah. Okay. Please go to our webpage for the recipe and additional resources for this program. We hope you will follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and remember to rate and review this podcast. As a licensed nonprofit organization, we are dependent on the kindness of our beloved listeners and always appreciate your donations, which are tax deductible. Please go to our webpage to donate in support of our work. www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number 1, dies.org. Marianne, what do you got?
Well, I got a lot, Charlie, but only so much I can talk about on the air. So I thought in our second half that I would talk about that if you're the person who's responsible for planning someone's funeral, you might inevitably be tasked with choosing the clothes they'll be wearing during the services and burial. Now, Charlie, I want to promise you I will not have you picking out what I would be wearing at my funeral or burial if I were having either of those things. Because God knows what I would be dressed as. Yeah, as I was saying.
Yes.
So, if you're going to be the person who's deciding how to dress the deceased, I thought I'd give you some ideas about what to wear, what not to wear. So if an item of clothing has sentimental value, something that, came from, the old country or something, probably don't have the person buried in that. In many instances, when they're dressing the deceased, the clothing is cut from behind to fit better.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not something that you want cut, probably don't take it. Pick something else. So they cut things up the back to aid in dressing, and it creates a more natural appearance for the deceased while they're laying in the casket. In situations where clothing is too big or too loose, it also helps to create a better fit when possible. If you do not wish for the garments that you're going to bring to be cut, let the funeral director know. A lot of times they're going to say, we can't do that, because really I've been in situations where families, after someone has died, when I was working in hospice, they'd say, well, I want you to put these pajamas on them. It's like, seriously, all alone with, literally dead weight of a body.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's pretty hard without cutting them. So really think about if you want the stuff back or not. Footwear. It's usually not recommended to bring footwear. It's not visible during the viewing. Only the top half of the casket is open. Also, it can be hard to place shoes on the deceased because the body could be rigid and swollen. Note, though, that the bottom layers of clothing, such as trousers and skirts, are still required, Charlie. You cannot get away with not wearing pants. But, even if they're not going to be seen, necessarily if only half the casket is open, but somebody might, move that little drape apart and want to just see what you got on under there. And generally they want to make sure you're dressed. So what do you want to consider when you're picking burial clothing? So if the outfit hasn't already been provided for you, so if the person who you know has died and they haven't said, hey, this is the dress or this is the suit, you're going to have to decide based on a variety of factors. If there's any material restrictions, which I'll talk about in a minute, religious or cultural requirements, age, personality, body conditions such as weight or scars, or if it's been a traumatic death from an accident, what's going to be seen. So in the first instance, the context of the funeral service should be considered. If there's going to be an open casket, then it's important to select the right clothing that's suitable for the circumstances and formality of the farewell. When there are no viewings in a closed casket, then you can choose any outfit that you want because nobody's going to see it and you can dress them any way that you want. A general rule of thumb is to pick something that the deceased would themselves wear to a funeral, noting age appropriateness. While most burial clothing is on the sort of semi-formal side, recent funeral trends have diverted away from tradition. Loved ones of the deceased have opted for more personalization, such as a casual t-shirt, sports jerseys, work or military uniforms, even wedding gowns. It's important to note here that there is no hard rule if you feel that the clothing reflects and pays tribute to the person. It's like if, I don't know, let's say they were Olympic swimmers or something. I don't know that you necessarily would want to put them in a bathing suit, but maybe you would. Just think about the other factors of how the body's going to look. I'll talk to you about that in a minute. So practical considerations to make when dressing the deceased. You're going to want to avoid tight clothing such as jeans. As a corpse, particularly one that's unembalmed, can be quite rigid and might have what's called skin slippage or sloughing upon contact. And what it means is that skin will just kind of pull right off. And so if you're trying to get something really tight on, the skin might go with it. So not a good idea. Pick items that are larger than usual to accommodate swollen abdominal regions, which can sometimes occur after an autopsy. Death or prolonged illness can change the shape of a body. Consider if the deceased will still fit in their wardrobe or if there's going to have to be adjusted. Generally opt for long sleeve tops, as embalming fluid can cause the skin on the arms to appear blotchy. Tops which cover the collarbone are preferred, as this area can look quite hollowed after death. And sort of the idea is to make that memory picture, that last thing that people are going to remember, as aesthetically pleasing as possible. Avoid sheer or lacy material because sutures may be visible through the clothing if there's been an autopsy. Consider coordinating the garments with the color of the casket and the floral arrangements. That would be pretty, so think about that. Jewelry is optional, but you may want to provide something for sentimental or cultural reasons. Like in our family, people always have their hands closed, and there's a rosary in their hands. Be mindful that necklaces are best adorned when you're standing up, for gravity. They kind of supposed to hang that way, but they can move around when you're laying flat. So just think about, is that necklace going to move or not? So if I were to give you a sample list of burial clothing, it would be a long sleeve top or dress, pants or skirt. If there were cosmetics such as lipstick or nail polish that the person always wore, send that along because, again, that memory picture, you want them to look like how they looked. So if all they ever wore was nude lipstick and the person doing the makeup puts, bright red on, people go, oh my God, where'd that lipstick come from? She would have died before she wore that. So don't go there. Bring what she normally would have done. If there's a hair dye color that they always used, bring that. If they wore a wig, a hat, or a hairpiece, bring it so that, again, they look like they looked. Scarves or ties, glasses or prosthetics if they were worn. So, if somebody always had their glasses on and then you don't bring them, they'll be like, oh, they don't look quite like themselves. And somebody's like, I don't know why they look different. So, they don't have the glasses on. Now, undergarments. You might think it's okay to go commando at a funeral. Well, you can. But if you're the corpse, generally, some undertakers will actually they have to have underwear. It's just a thing. So underwear, a vest, bra, stockings, socks, slips. I'm the kind of person, I wear my socks all the time for everything. So I would want socks on if I was in that situation. Jewelry or watch. And if there's other items that you want placed in a casket, if, a teddy bear, a doll, whatever. So those are the things that you want to think about in terms of what you're gonna have a person wear. Now, jewelry, I always think that personally that I would be really mad if anybody buried my jewelry with me. I might want to wear it, to my wake, but don't you dare bury it. So I know when my dad died, he had a this garnet ring, and they put it on him and they buried him with it. And I was too young to really weigh in on or even be aware of it. But years later, I said, "Did you guys bury Dad with that ring?" They said, "Yeah." It's like, oh, geez, that's such a waste,
Yeah.
So think about those things. Get the jewelry back is my my thought. The other thing that if you don't want to get involved with clothing and all of that is there's this kind of trend or back to an old trend of wearing a burial gown or a shroud. Now, the shroud, the meaning is to hide from view or conceal. And women made burial cloth for themselves and, let's say, their fiance before they got married, which was worn both during the wedding and then saved for the funeral. People prefer to bury their loved ones in cloth because it's more approachable and invites mourners to touch. The shroud has reappeared in the 21st century as a more sustainable alternative to the coffin. So, part of my research always, Charlie, is to look on Amazon and see if they have shrouds. And guess what?
Of course they have it. It's Amazon.
They have everything on Amazon.
Yes.
So, yes, they do have shrouds. They have shrouds for dogs.
Oh.
Lots of different ones of those.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right.
They have shrouds with handles built in, sort of like...
Oh.
I'll tell you what it reminded me of when I worked at the psych hospital and they would restrain people.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like because they have these the mesh sort of wraps around the body and then there's handles so you can carry the body in the shroud to where, if you're doing a green burial to wherever it is that they're going to be buried. So that's handy. They also have the plain muslin fabric to make a shroud. So once again, my theory of Amazon holds true. They have everything. A burial gown. So the burial gown or shroud is used to dress the deceased, and this is an alternative option for loved ones to consider if they're having trouble picking funeral clothes. One key advantage of a shroud is that they are adjustable. There's slits and drawstrings and that kind of thing across the back. And this is particularly helpful when the deceased no longer fits into their clothing of their wardrobe if they've lost a lot of weight due to illness. Modern burial gowns are made of natural fibers and resemble robes or dressing gowns. Funeral homes can provide a selection of colors and fabrics for bereaved families to choose from. There are specific clothing requirements that you must follow to ensure that you're adhering to the requirements of a green burial. So if you're having a green burial, and you want to have a shroud, wear a shroud, there's rules. So the clothing should be entirely biodegradable and made of untreated natural fabrics such as wool or cotton. You cannot include clothing with artificial accessories such as metal, zippers, buttons, elastic waistbands. If it can't biodegrade, you can't put it on your shroud.
Got it.
Now I put some resources in our show notes about there's groups and weekend things where you can go and make your own shroud. They even on the internet they'll give you the dimensions of it. And usually the person is laid sort of like crossways on the fabric, and it's like swaddling a baby. So they're wrapped up, like a pretty tight
Yeah.
burrito. The face is covered also. But people are making ahead of time their own shrouds with their own art or embroidery or, paints that you can paint on fabric. So there's lots of options that you could ahead of time make your own shroud. Just be sure you tell somebody where you put it so that they don't say, oh my God, I know she made a shroud 20 years ago. What did she do with it? Or he, because if you made it, you want to be buried in it. So make sure people can find it.
Yes.
So, any questions about clothing?
No. Well, I guess just on a personal note, what about you? What? I mean, do you intend to be buried or or cremated? I mean, or what?
I'm kind of leaning toward the water cremation.
Oh, okay.
I like that whole idea of that water nurturing some rose bushes or something of mine. But I'd like somebody to be able to take that water home and pour it on my rose bushes so that they could be infused,
Yeah.
And I'm not positive about if that'll be allowed. But, that's still kind of a new thing, and we don't even have that here in Oklahoma yet.
Okay.
Hopefully they'll get that up and running before I need them.
Yeah. Okay.
But I've never quite liked the idea of people coming in. I mean, like when I'm sick, I don't want anybody looking at me because I look like crap,
Yeah.
So, and I wouldn't want to be embalmed, so I will definitely not look at my best, unembalmed and laying somewhere. But I do think it's important that people, your loved ones, be able to see your body so that they can see that you're actually dead.
Yeah,
I think that's important.
Yeah, that was, I mean, as you know, just with the whole COVID thing over the past couple of years, so many people, were not able to see their loved ones again. They drop them off at the hospital and, that was it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get your head, it's hard to have, to kind of begin the grieving when you haven't actually seen the death.
Yes. I can't. I can't imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah, my heart goes out to people who've had that experience.
Yeah.
So now you're going to do a report on different religions and what they wear, right?
Yeah, and what they wear with, when they've died. So throughout history, cultures from across the globe have held the preparation and dressing of the deceased sacred. Many cultures and religious groups have designated specific items in which their deceased are to be funeralized and buried in. Two groups that have gone as far as to appoint specific groups of individuals with the task of dressing the deceased are the Jews and Muslims. In the Jewish religion, this group is known as the Shevra Kadisha, and in the Muslim religion, the group has many names. In both Jewish and Muslim faiths, shrouding, that is, covering or wrapping of the deceased in sacred garments, is one of the most pure and admirable acts that one can perform because it's an act of favor that cannot be returned by the deceased. Specific religions have requirements on how the service is conducted, while others may have requirements regarding how to dress the deceased. Catholics prefer more formal burial clothing, as it is viewed as respectful. This is consistent with the dress code expected of those attending Sunday Mass. An acceptable outfit for men may include a shirt or suit, while a woman may adorn a blouse or classic dress. Buddhists are buried in non-formal clothes worn every day. This reflects their value of equality. In certain denominations of Buddhism, they will dress the dead in white to symbolize virtue. Muslims, the Islamic faith, follows a different regimen, which requires the body to be buried almost immediately after death. The deceased are typically prepared and washed by family members. Men are dressed in 3-sheeted shroud, women in a shroud and veil, and their hair styled into 3 braids. Jehovah's Witnesses do not have a clear doctrine for the dress standards of their deceased. The family will usually choose a semi-formal outfit that is kept modest. Jewish individuals are traditionally buried in a white shroud made of simple, traditional fabrics, such as linen. If the deceased is a man, he should also have a yarmulke on his head, also known as a skull cap. Hindus follow specific rites when preparing a body after death. Family members will clean the deceased and shave the head before using herbs and scents to anoint their loved one. The deceased is dressed in clean clothing and wrapped in a shroud. Their thumbs and toes are then tied together to ensure the limbs are held in place. And
that was interesting.
Yeah, it is. And that's it for this.
And I think it's important to say that these are what is typically known about these different religions in terms of what they do. And that doesn't mean that a non-Hindu might not want like the Hindu burial rites,
right.
Or
yes.
that a Hindu might not want the typical burial rites. I mean, we give you the broad outline, and then individuals can do things or can decide not to do things. Or
can decide not to, exactly, yeah. And that's it for this week's episode. Please stay tuned for the journeys of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. Speaking of journeys, political satirist and journalist P.J. O'Rourke died a month ago in February. He wrote the following to his friend Peter Sagal, host of the quiz show, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Dear Peter, please accept my deepest sympathy on the death of your mother. I wish there was something words could do to relieve the burden of grief. Alas, you and I know how little weight words are able to carry. Let feelings take their place. There is no feeling so emptying of our hearts, so undermining of our foundation as the loss of our mothers. The other love in our lives is love we learned to know. The love of our mother is a love we had before we knew anything. A mother's death leaves us without the one piece in the puzzle of existence that we always thought we had in place. Now, Sagal wrote back to O'Rourke to thank him. On next week's podcast, I'll have O'Rourke's response to that letter. This is Charlie Navarrete.
And I'm Marianne Matzow, and we'll see you next week. Remember, dress for success, and every day is a gift.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.